Hey YouTube, what's up? My name is Jonathan. I'm one of the co-hosts of this podcast. I just wanted to preface this episode and say thank you for checking it out. I hope you guys enjoy it, and don't forget to subscribe, to like this video, and to share it with your friends. Also, check us out on Instagram at Talk Progression. Also, there's a link in the bio if you just want to listen to the audio version of this podcast. That's available as well. Also, just wanted to give you guys a heads up that the intro is static. We're still working on getting an animated version of that, but the rest of the podcast has video. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And thanks for checking us out. We'll see you around. Hello, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Sam.
And this is Progression in Progress. All right, welcome back to another episode of Progression in Progress, the show where progression happens in real time. How are we doing today, Samuel?
Doing awesome. How about you?
Doing pretty good. I guess we can get into it. I'm doing okay. I might have COVID, might not. We'll see what happens. Uh-oh. So if I sound sick, sorry. But I'm doing actually pretty fine. So not a big deal to me,
That's
at least.
Good, all things considered.
Yes, sir. I'm taking my vitamins, and that's about it.
Nice. Doing the same?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, dude, vitamin grind. I used to not believe in vitamins, but now I'm a believer.
I've never been a vitamin believer either, but I got some recently and I've been taking them, and I don't know if they help or not, but I'm just doing it anyway.
Dude, I'm a believer. I'm a believer. You eat more vitamins than you do food. So
whoa. That's crazy if you think about it.
Well, yeah. Well, that's because you never eat anything. I'm talking specifically about you. Like,
so you gotta be super healthy.
I don't know if that's how it works. I was joking with my mother today that since I can't taste anything right now, which is why I think I have COVID, I can't taste anything, that I was going to just go eat some dirt because I haven't been taking a B12 supplement. And I haven't been eating any fish. I mean, not fish. I haven't been eating meat or dairy, so I haven't been getting any B12.
Hey, now's a good time to try new stuff, if any. That's
what I'm saying. I'm just going to go eat a fistful of dirt and then call it good for a few more years. All right. Let's cut the BS. Let's get going. So this week's episode, this was something that I was thinking about, and the timing just happened to be perfect. So we're here talking about it today. So let me just pose this question. Maybe I'll give my initial thoughts, and then Sam, I want to hear what you're having to think. And we can maybe discuss it, and who knows, we'll come to a conclusion, maybe not. But I don't know, just discussing these things always helps me. So the question is what do we sacrifice in the name of productivity? And what do we sacrifice in the name of discipline? Right? Does that make sense? Just, do you feel like I need to explain it more, or do you feel like that makes sense?
I mean, I think that makes sense.
But I might as well explain it though, right? I guess a little more.
Maybe if people want some more backstory.
Yeah. So I think, the idea here is right. Is I think there's two different lifestyles, or if you were to go on opposite ends of the extreme, right, you could identify two different lifestyles. One that's very disciplined and one that's very productive, and then one that's not so disciplined and one that's not so productive, right? Sure. And there's different, what's the word? I don't want to say just happiness, but there's different like vibes, I guess. That might sound like really stupid and stupid to say, but I feel like there's different vibes associated with it, right? With on the side of discipline and productivity, there might be a lot more stress, a lot more sacrifice, a lot more pressure, a lot more responsibility versus a side of non-discipline and non-productivity, right? Do you feel like that's a good way to explain it?
I mean, there's definitely those connotations behind those. Whether or not that's the same for everyone,
True, yeah, because it could be different, yeah.
Some people probably enjoy and feel stressed when they're not productive, which I think you've definitely felt that way before. It's
true, yeah. So I guess maybe that wasn't the best way, but maybe that's just enough to kind of get us started with this conversation. And the whole idea, right, is like, what are we sacrificing for productivity, right? Like, so for example, I don't know, let's see. let's see. Well, I guess I always relate I always relate things to health, right? In food, because I feel like that makes things a little more clear, right? To eat healthy, to be super healthy, you have to sacrifice. I don't eat dessert. I don't eat fast food, right? So that's technically a sacrifice. Now, I think the sacrifice outweighs the benefit, right? But there is a sacrifice involved.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it just depends on what you're trying to do, and yeah, sometimes some things got to go.
Yeah, and I feel like there's two different types of productivity that I wanted to talk about. I think there's two different types of productivity that I think is worth identifying. The first one being productivity within a task. So like what I mean by that with like productivity in a task, like, okay, I'm going to sit down to do this. For me, I'm going to sit down and do this homework assignment, or I'm going to go do this task. Maybe, for you at work, Sam, it's something different. I got to do these X amount of tasks, right? For productivity. And that's like productivity within a task. And I think the sacrifice there versus the sacrifice versus the next type of productivity, which I'll explain after this, is sacrifice when it comes to productivity within a task, I think is extremely worth it. And the downsides are they're not that great, right? It's not that difficult, at least for me these days. I'm not perfect at it for sure. But I feel like the sacrifice of turning off my phone or putting it on do not disturb, or just deciding not to check it frequently while I'm doing homework, that's not an incredibly huge sacrifice, right?
Yeah. It's like if there's something that you have to do anyway, or it's like really important that you do it, then, I almost like, are you even sacrificing anything really? Like if you have to do it anyway, like just getting rid of all those other distractions and things, just make it easier, right?
I think so. That's why I don't think it's technically a sacrifice because, I might miss some texts and, some people might value responding quickly, right? Or whatever. Right. But so there's technically a sacrifice, but that's why I say it's not that great and why I wanted to separate it from this other type of productivity, which is, I think, overall productivity would be a good way to describe it. Productivity as a whole, a productive life, a productive day, a productive week. And I think the sacrifice required to achieve that is much, much different than productivity required for an individual task.
Yeah, definitely. Like you can definitely like look at maybe it is easier just to look at it from like a top down, like, okay, look at this whole week. This is what I've done. This is what I haven't been able to do. And yeah, you can definitely see what you're spending too much time on or not enough time on. And look at what you're sacrificing or not sacrificing.
Yeah. And I think, like, for example, to connect it to last week's episode where we talked about proper social media usage. And by the way, I completely failed last week. Election week, I completely failed. So I concede, I give up or not give up, but I admit failure for last week, and hopefully this coming week will be better. But so yeah, for example, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but to connect it back to last week, right? I feel like to have a productive week, right, you're going to have to sacrifice a little more, that you might have to properly use social media more, right? To have a productive week, I feel like I'm going to have to, at least for me, this is my personal opinion, and this might help illustrate the example I'm trying to make here, or the point I'm trying to make here, right? To have a productive week, I'm going to have to turn off my phone in the morning and not get distracted in the morning. I'm going to have to turn it off and just let myself think, and I'm going to have to focus on what's most important, and I'm going to have to cut out some of that BS, right? So that's a sacrifice that I feel like is different type of sacrifice. It's similar, but it's different because it's over the whole week, right? It's a habit change, more of just a decision change, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. More permanent.
Yeah. So I guess maybe let's assign some specifics here, right? Because the question here we're posing is, what do we give up in the name of productivity? What do we give up in the name of discipline? So let's maybe assign some things to that. I don't know. Sam, I feel like, what do you feel like initially off the bat? What do you feel like you give up in the name of productivity?
I mean, like for me personally, just with all the time that I'm putting into working right now, the things that I'm typically giving up is just like, just a lot of, free time. I use air quotes there. And like
leisure time.
Yeah, exactly. exploring interests, or just taking some time to chill out for a while. And then even like things like spending time with friends and family sometimes, just things like that kind of have to be pushed aside a little bit, due to working.
Yeah.
That's what I think of right off the bat.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm glad you brought up like leisure time, but then you also brought up exploring your interests, because that's one thing I want to get into. But you definitely, just I guess to hit it right off the bat, like the easy ones, you definitely give up some time with friends, especially. I feel like that's what I feel like personally right now is what I'm giving up most to be productive, right?
Yeah.
Is social opportunities. But I think I need to be better on my own personal end to be more social, to put in the effort to be more social. But sometimes it's like, oh, I feel like I don't have time, or I feel like, how does anyone have time? But that's maybe just because, I mean, I'm not trying to like, I don't know how to say it. I've done well this semester, definitely done better than I've done in the past. And I think a lot of that has to do with, because I have probably sacrificed a lot of that, that social time.
Right.
But I'm glad you brought up the difference between the way I described it, when I was thinking about this, the way I described it was free play versus productive free play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like free play is just like screwing around, browsing social media, playing video games, just chilling, right? But then there's like productive free time, which is what you talked about, which is like exploring your interests. And I feel like for me, the two things that I struggle with giving up, like I have done a good job, I guess, of managing my time so I can do well in school right now. But I feel like the two things that I feel like I'm missing out on is social time, like we just talked about. And two is that productive free time. And I feel like that might be a really big one that I kind of want to jump into further. Cause it might be a little boring to talk about, giving up time with family, giving up time with, friends, all that. I feel like that's probably been talked about a million times, but I feel like this giving up this productive free play, I'm a little more torn over, because I feel like productive free play could have some benefits, that unrealized benefits when you give it up. I don't know. What do you think?
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of torn about it too, because even when I think about doing stuff like that, I kind of feel like depending on what it is, it can kind of just, you start off with an intention of maybe learning about something, or looking, or maybe practicing something. But then sometimes I feel like it just kind of devolves into like just wasting time, like social media type things, or watching video. Like even if it's like an educational type video, you're still just kind of watching videos and not really applying anything. And even if you use it in the saying you're trying to learn something or get better at something, it's not really being put to use at all. So then like, what's the point? So I feel like it is important, but you kind of have to do something with it, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Well, one thing that's interesting that I've been noticing, right, is it's like, okay, I'll watch a lecture and I'll read a textbook, right? And it's like, oh shoot, yeah, it makes sense. I got this, easy peasy. But then when you actually do the practice, it's a different story.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you understand the lecture better, the practice is going to come easier, right? But I can watch a lecture and understand everything that the teacher's doing. And it makes sense. Everything's clicking, but then practice problems is a whole different ball game.
Right.
So I think that is something you've struck there. That makes sense. That there's a difference between just sitting back and watching something versus actually doing it for yourself. But I don't know. The reason I stress about missing out on productive free play, and this connects back to the little mini series I feel like we did, where Sam and I were trying to figure out what we wanted to do with our lives, and maybe a part of the problem. I don't know if it's the entire problem. I don't think it's the entire problem, because there's always multiple factors, I think. But I think maybe part of the problem that Sam and I have been facing is that, I've been so busy with school and Sam's been so busy with work that productive free play maybe is a little lacking, which could, I don't know, I feel like that could lead to knowing where your interests are, right? That can help a little bit. For example, if I'm studying art history all day long, art history, I don't find it incredibly boring, but it's definitely not my passion, what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I spend all day studying that. That means I'm not going to spend time, looking into something I'm interested in. And then, that happens day after day after day. And, your productive free play time is greatly reduced. And then it's much tougher to figure that out. I don't know. Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm missing it?
No, I totally agree with that. It's just, yeah, like, should we be giving ourselves time every week and kind of make it like mandatory to go out and try to look at these things? How much time should we dedicate to it when we're taking away time from other things that like may or may not be more productive per se? Like it's hard to say.
Dude, we are so dumb. We're so dumb. We've been talking about productive free play this whole time, and we're talking about productivity. If we feel like it's worth labeling productive, then we should be doing it, right?
I guess that's true. Yeah.
So I feel like, I guess the answer to that question is we just need to be doing it if it's actually productive. If it's worth, if we wanted to get into a whole debate whether or not productive free play is actually productive, I think that's a fair debate. But if we're going to label it, assuming right now we're going to label it productive free play, and, it's not, right. I guess the emphasis on the productive, less emphasis on the free play, right?
Yeah.
Something, that is maybe not entirely your main responsibility, but it's still something productive, correct? Right.
Sure.
But if we're willing to label it productive free play, then it's productive, is it not?
That's kind of what we were talking about before. It kind of depends what you're doing. Like, I do feel like, you can be doing things that seem like, productive, but then maybe, I don't know. I guess go back and forth, because maybe if it is just something you're doing and it, maybe is just a hobby or something that turns out, and maybe not something that's like, oh, I'm going to do this as a career or something because I love doing this or I found I've loved doing this in my free time so much. But is it also productive to, have time set away to even just do something that is just a hobby, and that's better for your mental well-being and everything like that? Like, that's another way you could look at it as well. So it's a hard question to say yes or no on, because I think it's really dependent on what you're doing and how you're using that time.
Yeah, I guess you're going to have to use some judgment skills to see whether or not it's actually truly, really productive. But I don't know. I feel like this might be just like one of those like culture things or whatever. But I feel like I hear, like you read an interview with the CEO or listen to a podcast with the CEO or something, and they're like, oh yeah, I have like unstructured free time, or you hear that more with creatives, but
right.
I don't know. I feel like, so maybe, I don't know, maybe we might need to explore this a little further, but I think my personal answer is, kind of thinking about it in my own life, I should be spending, if I'm willing to label it productive free time, I should probably be including it into the category of things I consider productive and not give it up.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you have any
final? Like you're really like, learning or progressing or, getting closer to whatever it is you're trying to do or trying to accomplish or think would be cool, then I think that's productive and worth doing. Yeah. I think maybe the biggest hurdle, at least in my mind, for something like that is like justifying it to myself that it's okay and that it is actually something productive when it could easily be labeled by yourself or especially others, I feel like, as being not productive, and then just, taking that too much to heart and then stop pursuing it entirely.
No, I agree. Because it's like you do something, right, that's necessary, but it doesn't feel like a traditional productive thing. And then you start questioning yourself or second guessing yourself and you're like, oh, is this truly productive? I definitely feel like I've felt that before. But, our last episode was 40 minutes and that was way too long. So let's start wrapping this up. I guess we posed a question at the beginning, is the productivity worth it? Is it worth, we posed the question at the beginning, what do we sacrifice for productivity? What do we sacrifice for discipline? And the ending question that I want to end it on is that sacrifice worth it? And I guess I'll ask you, Sam, first, because I got a whole slew of things I want to say. But I want to hear what you think first.
So for me, I think for me, the answer is yes. At least for now. Like, I feel like I'm getting closer to all my goals, and I'm just like kind of progressing further in the ways I'm, it just makes sense. The more time you put into something, the more you get better at it, and getting closer to all your goals and everything. So am I kind of sad that I'm missing out on some other things that I see other people doing and missing out personally? Yes, but I don't feel like I will. And maybe it's short-sighted of me to say that, maybe later on I'll look back at this time and be like, wow, I had all this other stuff around me that I completely missed on because I was just so focused on what I was doing now and regret it. But for now, I feel pretty good about it, about what the few things I'm sacrificing on for everything else I'm working towards.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's all about like, it's like good, better, best, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, it might be good to spend time. Well, it is for sure good, right? But I guess the devil's in the details. If you say it's good to spend time with friends, not the best, well, it's really important to spend time with friends and family. But if you're spending, 12 hours a day and ignoring all your other responsibilities, right, that there's a difference, I think.
Right. Yeah, totally.
So yeah, I don't know, and also it's doing about, yeah. So what I was going to say though, it's like doing what's most important. A lot of these things that we think are important, are not as important as we think. Mm-hmm. Not talking about, friends and family and stuff like that, because that's obviously important, but like smaller stuff, lower on the scale. Like, for example, so like in high school, I experimented with just giving up video games completely. Right. And, I thought it'd be like super tough. I would not have as much fun, but it really honestly wasn't that bad. And now, I haven't played video games at all this semester, and even when I was home over the summer and didn't have much going on, I really wasn't playing a ton of video games either, yep. And it hasn't. So there's some things that you think are going to be tough to give up, but then you do give them up and it's like, it's not that bad. Cause I honestly, I think in a perfect world, if I had 24 hours in a day and, ample time, sure, I'd play video games. But at this point in my life, I've decided that at this current moment in my life, it's not worth dedicating time to. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll hang out with my brothers over the summer and play games or something like that. But at this current moment, right, I've decided that's something worth sacrificing, But the last thing I wanted to finish up with is I wanted to go on a little econ rant. So sorry for everyone in advance, but so it was perfect timing. It was literally perfect timing. It was perfect timing. I was reading my econ textbook in the chapter. It was all about productivity this week. It was all about productivity. So it couldn't have been a better chapter because we're talking about productivity this week. And one thing that I wanted to highlight, I put a few screenshots here that I wanted to highlight, and maybe I'll post them on Instagram just so you guys can see them as well. But one of the ways we measure efficiency is GDP, and especially GDP per capita, right? Gross domestic product per capita. And to have a higher GDP, there's a lot of things that go into GDP, but a big part of GDP, right, is efficiency. And there's a efficiency and productivity, right? They're kind of slightly interchangeable, productivity and efficiency. And there's also a lot of factors that go into that, right? Because, for example, there's a lot of countries in the Middle East that have and in Africa that they have insane deposits of natural resources and oil, but they're not the richest countries in the world, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't even until recently, until the United States became a dominant force when it came to energy, right? It wasn't until recently, but the United States has been the richest, if not the richest countries for a while now, right?
Right.
And one thing that I think was interesting, right? So the United States at the time of this textbook, which was written like 2015, I think, the United States had the highest GDP per capita in the world. highest GDP per capita, and they were showing how GDP, even though it's not a perfect indicator of all the things that are important in life, for example, your GDP doesn't measure relationships, it doesn't it doesn't account for the goods produced in the home, it doesn't account for friendships, it doesn't account for stuff like that, for life satisfaction. But they have linked, the studies they've done have shown they've linked, correlation, not causation, but correlation of satisfaction with life and GDP. Those who live in countries with higher GDP per capita tend to have higher satisfaction rates. And then also they have higher standards of living, right? The life expectancy is higher. The overall life satisfaction is higher. The average years of schooling is higher, right? That graph that I'm looking at right here, just showing the top, showing different countries with different GDPs. And there's a clear trend between life satisfaction and other things that might indicate a good life, such as life expectancy, years of schooling, right? And it's linking those two, right? So I guess to answer my own question using a little bit of economics is the productivity worth it? Is the sacrifice we what we give up for productivity, what we give up for efficiency, what we give up to be disciplined, right? All those things we're giving up, is it worth it? And I guess this economic data would say so. And I guess just a little caveat, right, to throw in there that, it's not, there's a ton of different factors that lead into, someone in Bangladesh not being as efficient as someone in the United States.
Yeah.
It may have nothing to do with discipline and everything to do with capital. It may have, there's so many different factors that you can't boil it down to one simple statement. But what I'm looking at here is just causation, not causation. I'm looking at, correlation. And this data would suggest that the sacrifices for productivity are worth it.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense. I mean, and I kind of feel like for some reason when you were talking about that, it kind of made me think of just kind of how things are usually, or like the typical things where structured, at least here in the US, of, you go through school, and you go to work, and then you work until you retire, and you build up all your basically what I'm trying to say is like you kind of have like your most of your life you're just kind of working to build up all of your economics, so then you can go ahead and retire and then not have to be as like productive necessarily.
Sure.
And so I kind of feel like maybe that's just something to keep in mind, that maybe there are just periods that we have of being super productive, and then periods where we're, maybe not as productive per se, but then actually like enjoying the fruits of our labors. And, maybe that's important as well.
Maybe, yeah. And I guess I'm trying to find this graph right now in my textbook, and I'm not going to be able to find it quickly. Sorry, I messed up my camera to be able to look at my computer screen. But shoot, hold on. We'll probably just cut so we can find it, but I really want to show this real quick. Okay, I couldn't find it. I looked for 5 minutes and I couldn't find it. But I think the point that I was going to try to make is that, especially after what Sam just said, is I don't think what the message here is working yourself to death, right? Is working like just grinding is like the only way to, we just, with this data that I'm looking at, that's linking productivity to, satisfaction of life and better living standards, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that you like only being productive leads to you have to be so incredibly productive, and the more productive you are, the happier you are, right? That's not what I was trying to say, right? But rather I was just trying to make a point that generally the productivity seems to pay off, I guess.
Right.
It's not like
the accumulation of wealth doesn't mean that you're necessarily happier, kind of a thing.
Exactly. There's so many other factors, right? There's so many other factors, just like how we were talking about, there's so many other factors that determine someone's productivity. There's so many factors that determines happiness and satisfaction with your life. But I don't know, I guess just the point that I was trying to make, the reason why I wanted to put this in here is that just on a general scale, there's higher efficiency, higher productivity seems to be at least slightly linked to it seems to be worth it, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's a whole separate conversation you can have about balance, right? Because Germany is very high on the GDP. The graph that I was going to find showed that, Germany is very high on the GDP scale, and so is the United States, but Germany works less hours than the United States on average, right?
Mm.
So there's I guess the graph I was going to show is that balance is still an important part of the equation. Because, Germany, very high GDP, high satisfaction, according to this data that I'm looking at, very high standards of living, but they work less hours in the United States, and it's not incredibly different, right? There's a difference of $10,000 GDP per person. They actually live longer because they're not as fat as us, dang it. And their life satisfaction is almost the same, right? According to this data, right? So that's the point I was trying to make. But we've deviated way off. We've made this way too long. So I guess let's wrap it up. My personal conclusion is, yes, the productivity is worth it. The sacrifices you make for productivity are worth it, but with a caveat that I need to be including productive free play maybe into my life a little more, because it might be worth it. I think it's worth it. If we assign the word productive to it, I think it's worth it.
Yeah. And then I think even just kind of going off what you just said, we also need to be efficient in our productivity, and that can help us for one, getting better or being more productive with other things, and also just being able to maybe have that balance or something that we want as well. But yeah, so in general, sacrificing is good as long as what you're sacrificing for is also good.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Moderation in all things, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let's end it there. I don't want this to be another 40-minute episode like last time. So thank you so much for listening to Progression and Progress. Listen to Sam and I kind of hash things out, right? That's the whole idea here, is we're trying to progress in real time, progression in progress. So thanks for listening. Make sure to follow us on our socials at Talk Progression on Instagram, also on Twitter. Make sure to share this with a friend. What else, Sam?
And also just be sure to subscribe to the podcast on any of your podcasting platform of choice, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, whatever you like to use. Just be sure to go on there, give us a subscribe so you're notified of all of our future uploads. And be sure to review our podcast, give us 5 stars. Really appreciate that. And yeah, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you guys around. Thank you.
Bye.